to take up a shirt under the arms here. So we'll go ahead and get started. Before we do, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you can continue to get more videos in the future. Let's go. All right, so when you have your client with you, I like to always have a mirror in front of me so that I can look and see what I'm doing, kind of like your hairstylist or cosmetologist. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I typically will stand behind the person that I am fitting and kind of eyeball the amount that I need from the sides so that I am taking approximately the same amount. We can adjust that once we begin measuring it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I typically use my thumb as a guide, so this is going to be about to the end of my first knuckle. And I always start on the left hand side. Whenever you're doing alterations, you always want to start at the top. And if this were too low, you would want to start with your shoulders, but since this is fine and we're just taking up under the arms, we're going to go ahead and get started. So you don't want to get it so tight that, turn to the side. You don't want to get it so tight that it is pinching off here. You want to have just a little bit of ease in the arm's eye there. So I'm going to go ahead, get it pinned. You don't want it to pull or pucker. And if it did not fit correctly through the bust area, you could always come in here and take up the bust dart. But this is just a simple side seam. So we're going to continue pinning all the way down. And if they wanted a little more fitted through the waist, that's fine. Basically, it's just whatever your customer prefers. Making sure that when you pin, you have your side seam in the center as much as possible. Sometimes on thicker fabrics such as wedding gowns, it's a little more difficult to do that. So just make sure that you're in the center as much as possible. So I'm just going to repeat the same exact thing on the opposite side and then we'll come back. So make sure also whenever you are doing this that your customer has their arm out, but you also want to check it when they put their arm back down, because the distribution of their bust and chest area is going to change once they put their arm down. So just going to go ahead, get that first pin in there and continue with it all the way down just as I did on this side. And when we're finished, we'll have both sides pinned together and then I will be ready to begin the process of taking out this binding here on the edge and also on the hem. Okay, so as I pin this side, can you step back just a little bit? As I pinned this side, I realized that I had too much on this side, so I have about 1.25 inches on this side, only about 3/4 of an inch on this side. You can leave it like this and just divide it up equally between the front and the back sides, but I'm going to go ahead and just try to even it out while it's on her so that I can look at the fit and look at it before we move on. So I'm just going to move this out so it's about 1 inch from the end on both sides. And then, like I said, we will add the total amount and distribute that with our ruler once we get to that part. So when I pin the left side, I always like to stand from the back, but then when I pin the right side, I have to personally stand from the front so I can, it's just an easier way for me to pin. May really depend on what, if you're left-handed or right-handed. So now that I have this pinned up all the way down, we're going to have her put her arms down, just relax. Does that feel good? Okay. And I typically will fold it where it's going to be sewn so that you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like once you're finished. You can see that she still has plenty of wearing ease in here, but it's just a little more fitted through the waist area. You don't want it to be too tight on the hips. You can see she also has some ease in there, some wearing ease as well. So now we are ready to take it to the sewing machine or take it and begin taking this apart underneath the arms and here along the hem. So I will return after I am set up to do that. Now that we have everything pinned on the shirt, the first thing I did was just fold the shirt in half from the back side. You can see this is the front opening here, and I have matched my side seams just so that I can measure, because this is not taking up the same exact amount from the top to the bottom. So because of that, I want to just make sure that I have it even on both sides. So I have started here at the top edge, and you can see that the first pin is slightly off. So come back and measure that and just split the difference, move the pin over maybe 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to just press. I can feel there's a pin there on the underside. There's another pin right here and here, and there's the pin, that pin, that pin, and then that pin. So they all match except for this top armhole. To start the marking process, you want to just open up your shirt. And I'm just going to start with the first side here, marking right on the edge of where I have it pinned together. So I'm going to continue that all the way down where these pins are, so that when I come back in here to pin them together from the inside, I know exactly where I need for that seam to meet. So I'll meet you back at the end, and once I have turned it inside out. So you can see here that while the line is not exactly straight, we're just going to take our clear design ruler and true it up by connecting the lines going down to make it a straighter surface, or give us a straighter line to be able to sew by. If it was really curved, you could also use your hip curve here or some other type of ruler, but I like the clear design ruler because I'm able to see exactly where I'm measuring and what the total distance is. So for this one, the center seam, this is actually 1 3/8, and from this side center seam, hard to see on this black, that is 1 1/2. So that's where that smidge, and even with me moving the pins, did not come out exactly even. I'm just going to place this at the top between the 1 3/8 inch and 1 1/2. Measure again. Okay. Now I'm going to, since the rest of the pins were even on each side, I'm just going to connect my lines together. Using the edge of my ruler to connect them and give us a guide for sewing that seam allowance back in. So because this one was slightly off over here, and this one, you can see that these two markings are a little bit on the outside edge, but because I adjusted to try to accommodate for both, I'm just going to blend in my line. If you try to follow the crooked lines, then your seam is not going to lay flat. with the green. You just want to make sure that you true it up as good as you can. So now that we have this marked, the next thing to do is to come back in here and take out the stitches. So you can see the stitches here for the armhole binding and for the hem. So I'm going to go ahead and take those stitches out and meet you back before So I know that I said I would come back, and after I had seam ripped this binding, but I also feel like sometimes when I'm watching videos, people don't explain everything, especially when I'm crocheting and I'm completely new to it and don't really know what's going on. So I am going to just start this seam ripping process, and you'll see I am only taking it out to just a few stitches behind that chalk line. So where we're going to make our new seam, you want to take a couple of stitches out behind the chalk line. Don't go too far. If you have to adjust it later, you can, but the less you can take out, the easier it will be to close it back up. So I'm going to take these stitches out on this armhole binding from this chalk line over to this chalk line, here to here. Because of the way that this shirt is made, at the armhole binding here, the binding is sewn into the side seam, so there is not a need to take this bottom stitch out. So it would have been the top stitch here along the edge. So I only removed this bottom more inward stitch, not that top stitch when you're looking at this, or the one that's closest to the edge of your armhole. So only remove the bottom one, and then on this hem, I am going to do the same thing, only removing a couple of stitches past where we're going to take it up, and then go all the way across with it. You could sew through the armhole binding as well as the hem, but if you're doing alterations for a client, you want to make sure that you give them a product that looks like it did when they brought it to you. So this is the professional way to do it here, and I'm almost to the end of this hem. Careful not to tear a hole on the front side. Okay, so now I have my hem completely opened, and I will be able to pin this together now. And you can see whenever I start to pin, it's still kind of pulling a little bit here. So I'll probably come on and take out another maybe ½ inch of stitches on each side of our seam, so that I can get that nice and flat before I start to sew. And then we are going to fold this so that your side seam is nice and smooth and even, making sure that you get the edges here aligned. You also want to make sure that you've taken out enough here on that armhole binding to be able to get it flat. If you can't get it flat, then you need to go back and take out a little more. So I'm just going to follow my pins like you would a dart. I like to pin so that the seam allowance is facing my right hand, and the pins, I can pull them out as I'm sewing. So this is how it would be. So you're just going to make sure that this is nice and even here, matching your pins and your chalk line on both sides, and continue pinning all the way to the bottom, right on that line. So I will continue pinning, and then I will meet you back at the sewing machine. Okay, as I said before, it is extremely important to make sure that those two edges here are pinned together evenly
and you don't have any puckers on the underside. If you do have some puckers, then you can go ahead and take some more of these stitches out on that binding edge. I hate taking stitches out and putting them back in, so I am just going to try to pull it as firm as I can or snug as I can here, and go ahead and get started with it underneath the sewing machine. Roll my needle down into my fabric, making sure that I have everything flat. Set my sewing machine length on 3, on my stitch length on 3, and now that I have the needle down, I can go ahead and sew a couple of stitches, back stitch, and I will just follow this line all the way down that I have pinned. You want to keep it nice and flat on the top and the bottom. Now, as you can see down here on this bottom hem, I went ahead and pressed the hem out. You can see where that rolled hem was rolled over. So I went ahead and pressed it nice and flat on the bottom after I took those stitches out, and I'm going to sew all the way through to the bottom. Okay, now our side is sewn, and I am going to take it to the serger and serge off a 1/2 inch from this stitch line that we have here. Okay, so I do not allow my students to pick up the presser foot from behind like this because they forget to put it down and then the thread breaks. I'm also using white serger thread because I do a lot of bridle alterations, and for sake of time, I'm not going to change the thread to black. But if you were doing this alteration for a customer, then you definitely would want to change your thread to whatever color matches your garment. So it's always a good idea to have plenty of serger thread on hand. Through the years, I've built up quite a collection. I used to charge a small fee for serger thread. Now it's just mixed in with my hourly rate. So here we go. The foot is a 1/2 inch from this edge where the stitches are. So hopefully you can see those stitches there. I'm going to use the edge of my foot as my guide to stitch down those stitches, leaving a 1/2 inch seam line. Making sure that you just keep the edges nice and flat so you don't catch anything under there. You're going to serge all the way to the end. And now we have it completely serged. Now that we have stitched the side seam, serged the edge here, we are going to close up our armhole binding. So this is the armhole and the binding. And I first trimmed some of the excess here. I could probably trim just a little bit more. And then I'm going to fold it over and tuck it in. So one more time, trim. Fold, tuck it in, fold it over. Then we're going to place it underneath the sewing machine and stitch, following the other top stitch that we had from before. It's a 1/2 inch top stitch. So I'm just going to start, go ahead and back stitch. It's really important to make sure that you keep this seam allowance very even so it's the same on the front as it is the back. Now that I've done and blended that in, we have completed the armhole. And then we will sew up the hem. I trimmed the seam and then folded this over into that rolled hem that was existing. And now I'm just going to stitch across this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance for that rolled hem, and we will be finished. I have a bobbin that doesn't want to cooperate in there. Okay, now our hem is complete. I know this black is so hard to see, but now we are finished with our alteration on the side seam. And you would just repeat the same exact thing. Make sure that you come back in here and press, and you have successfully taken up a side seam with a rolled hem and armhole binding.